first house didn't look dangerous, but the moment the FBI breached the door, everything changed. The air reeked of chemicals. Metal barriers were welded into the walls. Cameras tracked every movement, and something inside those rooms had been running only minutes before agents entered.
So we ripped open the stairwell, and sure enough, the law rocket was there, along with about 35 other assortment of automatic weapons that we discovered.
House after house revealed darker secrets, each more disturbing than the last. By the time the final location was opened, agents understood one thing with absolute certainty. They were about to find something no one was prepared for. The fortified kill zone. The first warning sign came the moment the FBI's breaching ram hit the front door. Instead of collapsing inward like every normal suburban door does,
in Augusta, Georgia, the FBI, along with U.S. Customs and local police, worked to take down a violent drug gang.
It shuddered, bent, and then stopped dead, blocked by welded metal grills on the inside. "What the hell?" one agent muttered, stepping back as the team realized this wasn't a typical raid. It was a fortified choke point designed to slow them down long enough for someone inside to either escape or open fire. "Again! Hit it again!" the team leader ordered. The second strike ripped the outer frame loose, but the inner grill still held, vibrating under the force like a cage meant to trap whoever tried to enter. When the agents finally pried their way through, the house greeted them with a silence so unnerving several later described it as the kind of quiet that feels staged. Flashlights swept across walls that weren't drywall at all, but reinforced panels bolted into studs, creating a bunker-like structure that felt more military than residential. "This place is built for a last stand," an agent whispered, instinctively raising his weapon a little higher. No one disagreed. They already understood why they were here. This home was one of several across the Georgia suburbs that investigators had been monitoring for months. For months, investigators had collected reports of heavy nighttime activity, suspicious deliveries, and surveillance equipment pointed toward the street. They had also intercepted encrypted phone traffic that suggested the presence of narcotics, large sums of cash, and possibly high-powered weapons inside the home. Their mission was to confirm those reports, secure the occupants, and prevent dangerous materials from being moved into other neighborhoods. Then the smell hit them, a thick, suffocating blend of chemical residue, gun oil, burnt plastic, and something decaying in the corner. It clung to their throats and made the air feel heavy, stale, wrong. "They've been cooking something in here," another agent said, covering his mouth. But it wasn't just chemicals. Trash had been left to rot in piles, food containers molded on the counters. As the agents cleared each room, they noticed small fixtures tucked into corners near the ceiling. Some looked like cameras or sensors, although it was impossible to tell at first glance whether they were functional or abandoned. A few devices were hidden behind vents or blended into false wall panels. One agent paused and said quietly, "There is equipment everywhere." No one knew yet what it connected to or what it had been used for. All they understood at that moment was that the house had been carefully prepared long before they arrived. The most disturbing feature appeared when agents reached a narrow hallway that led into a single dark room. The hallway felt tight, almost as if it was built to force anyone entering to walk in a straight line. When they stepped into the room, their flashlights showed that it was completely empty except for a wooden chair placed in the center. Behind the doorframe, agents found heavy metal plates fixed into the wall. One agent stopped and whispered, "This is a kill room." The room was designed for one purpose. It was meant to trap a person and make them an easy target. The narrow hallway gave no space to move. The empty room offered no cover. The metal plates protected the shooter and kept the wall strong enough to handle gunfire. If someone walked into the room, they would stand in a clear, open space where a shooter could aim without any obstacle. The setup created a perfect shot for whoever waited on the other side. The realization sent a cold shock through the team. Someone had built this room to take a life, and they had done it inside a quiet suburban home. And as agents pushed deeper, the most disturbing part wasn't the fortification, it was who had been living inside with all of it. Children as cover. The deeper the agents moved into the home, the more the scene shifted from dangerous to disturbing. They entered a small bedroom and stood silent as their flashlights swept across toys scattered on the floor. There were stuffed animals propped against the wall. There were tiny shirts folded on a low dresser. There were children's drawings taped neatly beside the window. For a moment, it looked like any normal child's room. But the moment the agents stepped closer, they saw a thin layer of white dust covering everything. It clung to the blankets, it coated the toys, it settled into the fabric of the clothing. One agent reached out, touched a plastic truck, and held his fingers under his light. His voice dropped when he said, "This is meth residue. The air felt heavier after that. No one understood how children could sleep in a room where poison floated in the air. The residue covered everything because the adults had stored and packaged meth inside the same rooms where the children slept, and the powder settled onto their toys, blankets, and clothing like dust. The children were breathing this every night. Agents soon realized this was a tactic. Every sign pointed to a family being used as a shield. The children's beds were placed near the doorway, and the room closest to the street had clearly been kept clean, as if staged for anyone who happened to look inside. Investigators later learned that the adults in these homes encouraged the children to play outside during drop-offs. Neighbors remembered seeing kids riding bikes in the parking lot while vehicles packed with narcotics quietly backed into garages. The innocent activity outside was meant to hide the dangerous activity inside. It made the home look safe. It made the adults look like harmless parents. And it made everyone else let their guard down. Several neighbors told investigators that they noticed strange things over time. They saw cars arriving late at night with their headlights off. They saw unfamiliar men carrying heavy bags into the units. They heard arguments behind closed doors, yet not one of them reported anything. They were afraid. Some had seen what happens when people in these situations ask questions. One neighbor said quietly, "People go missing in other places for less than what I saw." That fear kept everyone silent. At the second raid location, the scene was even more heartbreaking. Agents opened a bedroom door and found two small beds pushed together. Above them hung a poster of a cartoon character, smiling and holding a balloon. In the corner of the room sat a duffel bag filled with meth. 700 pounds of narcotics were stored in the unit, and a large portion of it sat only a few feet from where two young children slept every night. The adults who lived here cared more about hiding a drug operation than protecting the children under their roof. Criminals know that law enforcement hesitates when they see children. That hesitation gives them time to escape, destroy evidence, or move shipments. It is a calculated strategy, and it almost worked here. But the illusion of normal family life shattered completely when agents discovered what was stored in the next room. The gun room. Agents expected drugs when they entered the next room, but what they found instead stopped them in their tracks. Their flashlights hit rows of metal cases stacked against the wall. Each one was tightly sealed and marked with numbers that did not match anything a family would keep in a suburban home. When they opened the first case, the room shifted from disturbing to unreal. Inside lay a rifle so large and heavy that two agents had to lift it out together. It was a .50 caliber weapon, the kind of rifle soldiers use to stop vehicles on a battlefield. The idea that such a weapon was sitting inside a quiet neighborhood only feet away from families was almost impossible to process. The team moved to the next case and found several long, compact weapons wrapped in cloth. When they unrolled the fabric, their stomachs tightened. These were squad automatic weapons. Each one had the capacity to fire hundreds of rounds per minute. In the wrong hands, they could clear an entire street before anyone had time to react. The room felt smaller the longer they stood there, as if the walls were closing in around the truth that they had just uncovered. Someone had turned a suburban address into a miniature armory. Agents opened drawer after drawer and found more disturbing tools. Handguns fitted with conversion parts sat beside empty magazines. These parts could turn a simple pistol into a fully automatic weapon with the pull of a trigger. The pieces were small enough to hide in a jacket pocket, yet powerful enough to turn a quiet block into the center of a deadly confrontation. An agent picked one up, held it between his fingers, and whispered, "They were ready for war." The number of weapons found inside the home told its own story. 9 firearms sat within reach of anyone who knew where to look. They were placed near windows, near hallways, near escape points. The setup made something very clear. Whoever ran this home did not plan to surrender if the police ever came through the door. They planned to fight. They planned to defend the house, as if it were the final position in a larger battle. As the agents stepped back and looked around the room, the truth settled heavily in the air. The layout did not resemble a family home. It resembled a war room. If law enforcement breached the door, the operators inside this building were prepared to hold their ground no matter the cost. But as agents moved through the fortified rooms, they realized something had gone very wrong. Every location they hit so far was empty. The people who were supposed to be inside had already escaped. They had left behind drugs, weapons, and even children, but not themselves. It became clear that someone had warned them. One unit's early movement had been seen, or a surveillance camera had caught an officer approaching, and the message spread through the group in minutes. The operators fled before agents reached the door. This failure changed the entire plan. Agents now understood that the suspects were warning each other as soon as one team approached a house. If even one officer was seen by a camera, or if one door was hit too early, the other houses emptied out before agents arrived. The FBI realized they could not raid the homes one at a time anymore. They needed one organized raid carried out across all locations at the exact same moment. It had to be fast, so no warning could spread, forceful enough to break through every barrier the suspects had built, and direct to the point with no hesitation. If the timing was off by even a minute, the suspects would escape again, and the operation would fail a second time. It was time for real action. Caught in the raid. The first raid unfolded in Sandy Springs as FBI vehicles rolled into a narrow cul-de-sac. Agents stepped out with weapons held steady and loudspeakers booming clear commands. "This is the FBI. Step out with your hands raised." A flashbang detonated near the entrance, lighting up the yard and stunning the air with a sharp crack. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds as officers formed a perimeter. Moments later, the front door opened, and a man walked out slowly with his hands high. Agents moved in and restrained him. He was identified as Jose Radila Maldonado, 29, an American citizen who blended effortlessly into suburban life. No one who lived near him had any idea he was helping operate a drug network. In Woodstock, the second arrest was violent. Agents approached a second property when a man burst through the back door and sprinted across the yard. Officers shouted for him to stop. Instead, he turned and fired a single shot, sending agents scrambling for cover. They returned fire in controlled bursts, striking a fence and forcing him down. He slipped, trying to climb over it, and was swarmed by agents who pinned him to the ground. Inside his pockets was a mixture of cocaine, meth, and marijuana. His name was Omar Flores Mina, 33, the man responsible for managing the movement of multiple drugs across the cell. The most heartbreaking moment happened in Vine City. Agents breached another home tied to the drug circuit and immediately froze when they heard a thin, trembling cry coming from a back room. They moved quickly toward the sound. Inside, a toddler was crouched behind a bed, coughing from the chemical dust in the air. His small hands were shaking as he tried to shield his face. One agent gently lifted him, held him close, and carried him outside while others searched the house. Investigators later confirmed the child belonged to one of the operators who lived in the home. That man had escaped out a side door minutes before the breach, leaving his own son behind. Minutes later, the toddler's father was found. Agents tackled 52-year-old Juvencio Farfan Arellano in an alleyway after he attempted to slip between two houses. He was the logistical mover, the man responsible for checking inventory, transporting stock, and keeping the operation running smoothly. Without him, the entire pipeline would have struggled to function. The arrests finally brought the main group of suspects into custody, but their capture did not bring relief. Instead, it made investigators look closer at every house linked to the raids. When agents searched each location again, especially the heavily reinforced home with metal grills, cameras, and hidden wiring, they found signs that the men they arrested were only a small part of a much larger operation. The homes were set up to support something far more organized and far more dangerous than a local drug. The haunted room. When investigators returned to the fortified home after the arrests, the goal was simple. They needed to make sure nothing had been overlooked in the chaos. The first sweep had moved fast, and they expected to find stray items, loose ammunition, leftover packaging, maybe more drugs hidden behind furniture. What they did not expect was a room no one had seen before. One agent tapped the back wall of a storage closet and heard a hollow sound. He ran his hand along a panel, pressed once, and felt it shift. The wall swung open like a door, revealing a dim hallway behind it. The air coming from inside was warm, not stale. Someone had been in that hallway very recently. The agents stepped into the hidden space with their weapons drawn. A folding chair lay on its side on the floor. A cup of coffee sat on a small table, still steaming. A cigarette burned in an ashtray, its smoke rising in a thin line as if the person who lit it had stepped away only seconds before. An open laptop sat on the desk, wiped so clean there were no visible files, but the screen was still warm. A router blinked rapidly, its signal pattern suggesting it had been unplugged or cut off by someone in a hurry. On the dusty concrete floor near the vent, agents saw a single set of footprints, fresh, sharp, and leading upward into a metal crawl space large enough for a person to escape through. This was not an abandoned room. This was a workstation. Whoever used it had been watching the raid unfold from just a few steps away. As one agent whispered, "He was here while we were outside." The thought sent a wave of unease through the team. They had been standing only feet from a person who knew the layout better than they did, who had planned for this moment, and who had slipped out through a hidden exit without leaving a trace. Then they reached the far wall, and the real horror set in. A large corkboard covered nearly the entire surface. Pinned to it were printed photographs of neighborhood streets, parked cars, and the faces of people who lived nearby. There were pictures of agents' vehicles, taken days or even weeks before the raid. Some photos were taken from inside the house itself, through blinds and from narrow openings in the walls. Someone had been watching law enforcement long before law enforcement even realized this home was under surveillance. But the most disturbing photos were the ones of children who lived in the surrounding apartments and houses. The kids were pictured walking to school, playing outside, riding bicycles. At first, agents wondered if they were being protected. Then they saw the notes next to the photos. Times, dates, patterns. The children were not being guarded. They were being tracked, used to understand the rhythms of the community, used to mask movements when needed. When agents checked the timestamps on the surveillance feeds tied to this room, everything became clear. The camera system had been shut down the moment the first door of the raid was hit. The operator inside this hidden room escaped through the vent while agents were still breaching the front of the house. That meant the real person running the cell had been less than 30 feet from federal officers during the raid. Nothing in the room belonged to the men already arrested. The drives, the routing sheets, the coded notes. They all pointed to someone higher, someone still out there, someone who had planned the entire setup with careful detail. And that was the moment Homeland Security contacted the command post with a message that changed the direction of the entire investigation. The hidden cartel. Homeland Security analysts were called into the command post as soon as the hidden room was documented. They were given the encrypted drives, the route logs, the surveillance timestamps, and the photographs taken inside the house. It took them less than an hour to reach a conclusion that stunned the room. Every detail matched patterns seen in other investigations across the country. The rotating couriers, the 90-day travel cycles, the fortified layout, the hidden exit system, and the way children were used as cover were not just random choices. These were signature elements of CJ&G's operating model, the same structure identified in cartel cells uncovered in Texas, Illinois, and California. This was not a guess, it was a direct match. Analysts then broke down the structure using the exact men already in custody. Juvencio Farfán Arellano and Omar Flores Mina fit the profile of the two Mexican nationals' CJ&G places inside their U.S. cells. They are the operators who manage drugs, weapons, and enforcement. Jose Radila Maldonado fit the role of the American face, the person who rents the homes, signs the paperwork, blends into the neighborhood, and handles tasks that require a clean local identity. Homeland Security pointed out that CJ&G always builds cells with this exact three-man setup: 2 trusted cartel members from Mexico and 1 American citizen who makes the operation look harmless. The Georgia arrests matched the pattern perfectly. Second was the level of organization. Local drug crews do not use synchronized logs that track shipments down to the hour. They do not maintain escape vents built into the walls. They do not create kill zones or rooms designed for last stand defense. They do not install high-grade surveillance equipment with multiple routers feeding to off-site locations. And they do not abandon properties in perfect unison when a single raid begins. This level of discipline and coordination is a trademark of only a few criminal groups, and CJ&G is one of them. Third was the brutality factor. CJ&G is known for using extreme violence to enforce control. In other states, CJ&G cells have built rooms designed for interrogation and punishment. They have used soundproof basements. They have used restraints. They have used high-powered rifles not just for protection, but to eliminate competition. Agents reviewing the photographs of the kill room, the fortified hallway, and the choke points inside the Georgia house recognized the same tactical setups found in CJ&G properties in California, Texas, and Chicago. The similarities were too specific to be coincidence. Then there was the product. The meth found in the houses matched the purity level linked to CJ&G super labs in Mexico. The packaging style matched prior seizures in the Midwest. The sheer volume, hundreds of pounds stored inside homes with children, was consistent with CJ&G distribution hubs, not neighborhood dealers. When the analysts finished the comparison, the conclusion was unavoidable. This was a verified CJ&G cell operating in Georgia. One analyst said plainly, "They do not try to look like other crews. Other crews try to look like them. This is their system. This is their design." The room fell silent. If this was a CJ&G hub, it meant the cell in Georgia was not acting alone. It was one link in a chain that stretched across multiple states, and their real command structure was still active. But the most frightening discovery was waiting inside a house the FBI did not even know existed. The Forbidden House. Minutes after CJNG was confirmed, something unexpected happened. One of the routers seized from the fortified home sent out a brief signal before shutting down for good. It connected to an address no one had ever seen in the investigation. It was a small rental property 20 minutes away. A team was sent immediately. From the outside, the house looked abandoned. The windows were bare. No cars were in the driveway. There were no toys, no furniture, no lights. It felt empty. But the moment agents stepped into the basement, they understood why this location had been hidden. The basement walls were covered in thick, soundproof padding. Metal restraints were bolted into the concrete floor. A single chair stood in the center of the room, facing a camera fixed at eye level. The floor had frightening dark stains that did not come from water or mud. In a back corner, agents found a metal bin filled with half-burned papers. Some pages listed names. Some listed amounts of money. Some were written in Spanish. One page, charred at the edges but still readable, contained the names of 2 DEA agents, assigned to a completely different state. Someone had been tracking federal officers long before the raids. When agents moved deeper into the basement, the discovery became even worse. Behind a second door, they found a body. It was a man in his 30s, lying on the floor, still warm. There were marks on his wrists from restraints and bruising across his chest and arms. Agents checked for a pulse, but there was none. He had been alive less than an hour earlier. The shock in the room was immediate. This was not an old crime scene. Someone had been interrogating him while the raids were happening across the county. The obvious question hit every agent at once. Why was a place like this unguarded? Why did no one stay behind? Homeland Security gave the answer minutes later. The intercepted router ping that led them to the house was not an accident. It was a mistake. When the raids started at the other locations, CJNG operators received an alert through their surveillance system. They triggered an emergency escape protocol used when law enforcement gets too close. The protocol requires all operators to abandon every property immediately, including torture sites, stash houses, and safe rooms. The goal is simple: leave before anyone can be captured alive. The man on the floor had been left behind because he was never meant to escape. Evidence found in the room suggested he had been caught stealing or hiding product, a crime CJNG punishes with extreme violence. He had been restrained, interrogated, and beaten before the raids began. When the alarm went out, the enforcers fled immediately and left him to die. They shut down all cameras and signals on the way out. The only reason the house was found at all was because one router failed to disconnect fast enough, sending a brief signal for investigators to trace. The body confirmed what the basement already implied. This was a place where CJNG punished its own people, silenced threats, and erased anyone who disobeyed. The silence that meant retaliation. Within hours of the raids, something happened that every federal agency recognized immediately. Every phone number tied to the group stopped working at the same time. Every router that had been connected to the surveillance network went offline. Cars known to belong to operators disappeared from the state without leaving digital trails. Agents monitoring the system noticed a pattern they had seen before in other cartel investigations. The group did not panic. They did not break apart. They did not send frantic messages or scramble for escape routes. They did something far more controlled. They went silent. Homeland Security warned that CJNG cells in other states had responded this way before major retaliation. Officers at staging areas reported small drones flying overhead at night, drifting slowly across the sky as if mapping the perimeter. They were checking how many officers were on site, what vehicles were being used, and whether the police had increased security. The drones were gathering information for planning a countermove. Families living near the original stash houses told police they saw unfamiliar cars circling the neighborhood, slowing down in front of certain homes, and then driving away without headlights. These cars were conducting surveillance, checking which residents were cooperating with law enforcement and identifying houses where police had been seen entering. They were looking for potential informants and vulnerable targets. Police departments were ordered to move all arrested suspects into protective isolation because CJNG is known to eliminate anyone they believe might cooperate with authorities. Informants, couriers, even members of their own crew. No one is considered safe once silence begins. The raids did not stop the network. They activated it. One Homeland Security officer explained it clearly. If they planned to fight back immediately, we would already be dealing with it. The quiet is not a pause, it is preparation. Experts agreed. CJNG does not abandon territory once they enter it. They pause, reorganize, pull in outside help, replace the local operators, and rebuild the structure from the top down. This was not the end of the case. It was the beginning of a much larger operation. And this time, the FBI would not wait. They were already planning the strike that would hit the cartel before the cartel ever saw it coming. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.